looks like, oh, okay, this person is at home in their body. They're comfortable in their body. They can breathe without effort, no accessory muscle use. You can actually tell that the breath is orienting. It's like beginning in the pelvic floor and coming up, initiating there. There's this, but there's also a shape without effort. So it's an effortless shape, right?
All right, welcome back to the Village Sessions.
Bringing wisdom home.
Yeah, we're going to get started. First of all, your outfit right now, it's giving Parent Trap vibes.
It's giving Chessie.
One of my favorite movies.
Chessie's like my go-to daily style when I'm at home.
It's
100%.
true.
So if there's anyone I could be off the Parent Trap, it would probably be her.
Chessie.
Yeah.
It's so funny because also whenever you guys were filming some Rooted Families content, wasn't Kyle doing trashing you a little bit? She's like, "Oh, Parent Trap vibes all over your Instagram."
What? Oh, he was.
He was like,
he totally did that.
He was. He like put a picture of Chessie, put a picture of me, and he was like,
did.
I see no difference.
Yeah.
She is the ultimate character on that
She's
iconic movie.
She holds it.
Yep.
You know, it's funny that you're dressing the part today.
I don't know.
We wanted to chat about something that is coming to the consciousness of all three of us. And this idea of breathable bodies, fertile bodies, the way that women have transformed through the years. And something that all three of us had individual experiences with was playing with how dynamic movement informs our bodies, informs our emotions, informs our lives. And it's actually something that I've taken to heart in a huge way, and something that's been pulled through in many, not even just in my chiropractic practice or like in my own birth experience, but something that's also informing other projects that I'm wanting to kickstart. And in 2025, I'll be launching the Hoppa label, which is a clothing line, natural fibered, organic material, a clothing line that it's funny because the midline revolution is we're bringing this mother line through, and Hoppa label had dropped in 2020, and it was like a divine moment where I was like, oh, I'm gonna have a clothing line, and all of these pieces are gonna be named after my great aunts and my great great aunts, and they're gonna tell a story, and we're gonna honor like our ancestry and what the women in my family did, and beautify it, and bring together this idea of intentionally clothing yourself in a way to, create heirloom worthy pieces, because I feel like so much of that with fast fashion and just the way that our world has worked is dropped out. So bringing back intentionality, one with shopping and consuming, but two with like what you're choosing to put on your body, and also creating your story and your legacy. And like, how can clothing do that? But like having a piece of fabric that you're like, ooh, there's a story here. There were these stories of these women that made these and connected to this great aunt in Missouri who did this, and like, what am I doing? What am I doing right now to like help create a legacy for my family? Part of that was the expansion piece. And so like we've all talked about, and you've talked about a lot publicly on Instagram and on social media and in your circles about what a open breathing body, and this is Michele's terms, looks like. What does fertility, what is the image of a fertile woman? And what these seeming restrictions in different areas of the body or lack of movement in certain planes, how that informs your consciousness, how that informs your decision making, how that informs your family and the offspring that come through you. And so one, I'm excited to have a line that I'm like, you're going to be able to go through the transitions of maidenhood, motherhood, and beyond into these zones and wear this. And also hopefully, like the idea too is transform the way that we see women modeling clothing online. Women
Huge.
that are in expansive bodies, have width, have length, that carry like certain areas of their body, and not just talking about like oversized, you know what I mean? Because there's that whole trend and thread too. But like genuinely like an authentic, what I would determine healthy, right? Healthy and available movement and like and breath and life and vitality. What would it look like for women to model that online, and for like, you know, if I have a daughter, for her to grow up and be like, oh, this is what I could be. This is how I can move and how I can show up in the world and take up space. So yeah, if one of you guys want to kick it off, I would love, because I know we had pre-game chatted about what women's body looked like in the time leading up to now, and what little things have been brought into society. So if one of you guys want to kick it off.
Well, and I was going to say first, just going back to my excitement about HAPA releasing and launching, is my personal experience with this. And you guys, if you haven't listened to our mirroring episode, that's when we kind of lay the foundational framework for what is bowspring, what is the class that Amanda teaches and Michelle is a model for, which is Awaken Your Bow. And so go back and listen to that if you guys are not already familiar with that term. But my personal experience with bowspring and starting to embody and integrate the 10 key algorithm and come into a state of literally being able to breathe and not realizing how much restriction was present there before, is I realized my clothes started feeling very uncomfortable. And then that was that was just kind of like a huge shift to my own awareness of the fashion industry. And then I went on this year-long process sourcing and experimenting with different clothes, which maybe one worked in one season, and then I, went into another shape. I held a new shape, in which case, I needed to either upgrade just the way that things were made. And what I realized after a whole year of exploring and experimenting is that literally almost all of the brands that I would explore, the way that the clothes are designed are for a tucked pelvis. And so the seams, even like the inseam of how shorts, pants, even with activewear are made, is they actually tuck your pelvis downward. Yep. And if you guys have had taken a bowspring class, that might not be where you start, but that is something that starts to untuck. You get your ribs online and you're able to breathe. And then naturally your tail is what Amanda and Michelle like to call it. It starts to untuck. And so you have a whole experience of like, oh my gosh, my pelvis has been like literally in a state of flexion up until now. And this is present a lot in the fitness industry, weightlifting. We'll get into that in a second when we chat a little bit about birth. But it was really a cool experience for me to, number one, realize, okay, as a fashion industry, this is where we're headed. What can we create? And then you were like, I'm going to create a clothing line. Yeah. I'm going to create an expansive clothing line.
I had this similar experience with the rib cage and shoulder width. Because Molly's always had like wide shoulders. But whenever I came online with bowspring, it was like the width continued. Yeah, and totally. What did that do to my whole midsection? I used to be able to like put my hand around the front and back. Ribs. The base of the ribs, and be able to touch. And I always like had like something surrounding that. And I was like, oh yeah, my waist is tiny, but that wasn't, there was no true functionality for like, where I wanted to head as a woman, and being fertile and being pregnant and then birthing and then coming back into sustainability within the postpartum dynamic. So similar experience, but just in a different area. And then with breastfeeding and like I could go down the rabbit hole of all these things that like the clothes that I've worn, how they've been just not made for women.
100%. 100%. And then some people find out through their birth experience, because it's the biological blueprint of how a woman's body expands to open and a baby to descend, and to have that actually as an experience of like, oh, there's actually a way. There is a what do you call that? Universal way. There's a universal blueprint and framework that describes an open breathing body. And so Maybe we can start with what you were saying, just going through kind of like the history of, even just taking like America and looking at how the woman's body has changed so much throughout the years, so much throughout the decades. And that's been very reflective of things going on, war, scarcity, famine, societal like standards of beauty, nutrition, food. And Michelle was sharing something really interesting about, was it Leave It to Beaver?
Yeah, Amanda and I were having this conversation one day after a 1-to-1, and she was talking about how she's watched all of like Leave It to Beaver, and in the beginning, and I have too. I mean, there's shows that were like on TV like after school in my era, and then we went into like Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch and all those. But before that was Leave It to Beaver. And so she was talking about how in the beginning episodes of Leave It to Beaver, they had like a bowl of fruit out on the counter, and the kids would come in after school and they'd, do their after school, like rehash of the day. And they would have a piece of fruit. And then as the episodes went on, then it became processed foods. And then so the mom, it was June and Ward, right? So June would make this meal, for dinner, and then later on it became like freezer meals, like TV dinners they called them, And then also in the beginning they were like playing and doing things outside, and then as that progressed, it was let's go look at the TV. It wasn't even watch TV. It was like look at the TV, right? So there was this progression from in modern post World War II life from this to this, And then also what was interesting too is like I remember shows like Mary Tyler Moore and Bewitched and some of those other 60s-ish kind of shows. But what I remember of it is that initially the women were very like erect, like their posture was very ears, shoulders, hips, regal. And a lot of that would have been taught, remember, like in etiquette school, like they would have gone to class.
Even in Catholic school, there was like a way that you sit in the pew, a way that you kneel.
Right.
Your shoulders are up, your eyes are up, you
Right.
sing, you do these things. There was a resonance with being up, slouching. No.
Yeah.
Hoods on. No.
Yeah. So it was appropriate posturing and behavior for the place that you were in, that kind of thing. And then as the TV shows went along, then you could begin to see like the forward head posture coming in. But then that was also probably like in the 60s, like after Vietnam, early 70s, where women were now in the secretarial pool. So they were working now as secretaries, and they were typing, and they were doing all of the stuff that everyone does now, right? So you could kind of begin to see this gradual like collapsing into the desk posture, right?
And then you take into consideration what was happening in the obstetric culture in America, and how women over time, they're coming here, but they're also coming here and tucking.
Tucking, yeah.
Yeah, they're getting
going back into
twilight
flexion.
birth,
Yeah.
like getting babies pulled out of them, and then waking up and having a baby on your chest, and
Right.
like, of course, what's happening down there. So the tucking both ways.
Right.
It's interesting because I remember I went to a classical conversations homeschool co-op in middle school, and we had these very integrative experiences with whatever we were studying at the time. And when we were studying the 50s, we had a cotillion, in which case we learned proper swing dancing. And then we took a 1950s etiquette class. And so we learned how to hold our bodies to even translate to dancing, how you dance. It's a very erect posture even while you're dancing. 100%. Oh, you felt so sturdy, so sturdy as the female role in a dancing dynamic with that like proper 1950s swing dancing method. So, but I remember the etiquette classes being so meticulous that it really imprinted like, oh, this is the way I'm going to eat from now on. But I remember feeling that just there's an element of regalness, I think, that really came through. And so something I see in my spaces a lot is the question of, well, if my mom looks like this and my grandma looks like this or my dad looks like this, can my body shift? Isn't it genetically informed? Isn't this, first off, do we believe that about anything, that we can't do something because our genetics inform something? So get clear on your belief systems there. But I found it particularly interesting to take a chronological timeline look at just America. I actually have this as a highlight still saved on my Instagram called Body Types, in which case I looked at every decade in the 1900s and then leading up until now with, okay, what was the ideal body type? What would you see everywhere? You could actually go Google these graphs of like, what did people look like in the 50s, in the 60s? There was a very clear state of rapport of basically how your body was shaped according to ecologically the relationship with what was going on. I called it what's for dinner. And so I was showing like, here's the foods that were being eaten. This is when we had diet culture come along. You saw a drastic shift in people's bodies. You saw drastic shifts after the war. You saw drastic shifts after, seasons of scarcity. And then leading up until like the implementation of seed oils, for example, you saw huge fat distribution changes as well. And so it's really nice to consider like even our own grandmothers and great grandmothers were having a whole different body disposition and even bone structure, like relationship and change and shaping according to their environment. And therefore, can you change? Can you completely like literally like, what would be the word, like metamorph in a way? Yeah. Absolutely. And that's what happened with me. I have photos still saved to my, I think it's called Body Types. Yeah, maybe alignment, where I showed my hip changes. I used to be very in rapport with actually the hips of my brothers and my dad and my grandmother. And so I always thought we just are a narrow hipped family. That was something I downloaded for a while. And after my birth with my son, it was like, oh, I had a C-section because we're a narrow hipped family. Like it was just something that I took on as a belief system. And so changing my entire structure through bowspring and getting into alignment in all areas of life, mitochondrially, metabolically, and watching what happened and transformed has very much been, just such an expansive process for me.
Yeah, it's interesting talking even socially, the ecological dynamic there. There's been multiple, but there was one in particular, neuroposturing session that I was doing with an IBCLC here on island. And we had a family who was coming in and doing intensive work with us, deciding whether their baby was going to receive some type of lip and tongue tie revision or release or not. And, we're working with them as a family, and we're working with the baby specifically with the body. And there's some pieces that we keep saying over and over. It's like the things that you say all the time that you're like, okay, if we get the hips to really move, this is going to change. And like, we're saying these things, and the mom like looks at us. This is probably like the 4th session. And she looks at us and she's like, is he ever going to have a closed mouth posture? And we're like, potentially, like, this is where we're going. These are the foundational things that we need to set. She's like, but I keep my mouth open. And we were like, yes, yes, thank you. Like, thank you for coming. Thank you
for
there.
the recognition.
Yeah, thank you for the recognition. And then she's like going into these pieces of like, oh my gosh, I've been a model my entire life. The way that they have trained me to stand, to hold my body, to pose for photos, tucked pelvis, open mouth, tucked ribs, collapse, hold your breath. This was what she practiced for, her whole career. And then she has a baby who's tucked hips, closed breath. Like every time we were putting him in position, he has no breath, no continuity, no like moving, nothing was moving in. We always talk about the volumes of the body, right? So like the head, the cervical body, the rib cage body, and then the pelvic body. Those volumes need to work they're in relationship with each other. They need to work in synchronicity, but also in differentiation. And so we weren't getting all of the pieces of the puzzle to map in. And she had this download, and we didn't see her again after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Them and their babies just took off. They took off, and they were like, we got this now. Now I know what I need to do. We're like, here are the tools. She was like, yeah, we already did a one-on-one with Amanda, yada, yada. And even after that, it still hadn't landed for her. And so she was like, okay, now I get it. Now I'm going to take this. Now we're going to work with our baby. Now we're going to work with my body, get my lips closed, do some things, do some reorganizing. And I was like, yeah, this is your key. This is you taking responsibility for your own frame, coming into a breathable, expansive body. How does that shift you in your dynamic?
And this is why Michelle always uses the phrase doing with instead of doing to. This is the framework with Rooted Families and Midline Revolution is, what would it look like for you to go first? We're going to talk about in the next episode, in the final episode. And we chat about this in the mirroring episode of the woman's process quite literally informs and shifts and transforms her family. It just does. And so for you to be able to look at that, see that, and then not you, but anybody though. Yes, you.
Anybody.
Yes,
me
yes,
too,
anybody.
Me too, right? I've had the same experience with my son.
Yes.
Similar, not the exact same, but I've had an experience where it was a moment of, oh yeah, good. I have choice. I have a choice right now.
Totally.
I could either like go in, do the thing to him, or I could be like, what do I need to organize in me? What do I need to organize out here? Let's organize some things. That's like my Virgo, my organizing. But really recalibrating, reorienting, getting some things in relationship to each other, and then watch how he shifted.
Totally. So maybe we can talk about what is the open breathing body? Where is that space created? And you guys will know, if you're listening, through the body experience what that feels like. And in practical terms, just where we're going right now, clearly reflected in the fashion industry, because I'll leave the brands anonymous, but once you guys have an experience and you have the awareness and the eyes to see, you're like, it's not only just the clothes, but it's the models, it's the images that we see that tell us what these are supposed to even look like on us.
Yeah, and then we're going further into this social media kind of vortex of scrolling and then seeing potentially things that aren't real, things that are artificially curated or created and like photoshopped, and then we're like zooming on this further. We're like, okay, I need to like morph my body into this unrealistic idea. And then scrolling, if we're shopping, or very few people shop in person anymore, right? Most of it's e-commerce now, but nothing wrong with that. But like those are the images that's shaping our brain in the way that someone is supposed to look. And I think I've had a lot of conversations with, just friends and clients and things about even the sizing, like the sizing thing. Yeah. So like clothes are created and structured in a way to match and mirror a certain body type, but it's also reflected in like the sizing pieces. And I think there's some brands doing better at this, but what is a true reflection of like a woman's body or a size? And I don't have as much charge around it, but like I know a lot of women in my field do. But there's a certain brand that I actually really love. They make their clothes for very petite women. Totally fine. I'm not trying to like change them. And I'm actually willing to go get a 2XL in that clothing because I really like the way that it doesn't have like this charge for me. But someone else seeing that being like, what does that mean? I'm like, actually, it means that I'm expansive, breathing, moving, dynamic, breastfeeding my baby, birthing my baby at home. Like all of those things for me, that's what that indicates.
Especially if you are buying, like I remember having this experience with a few brands where the actual design, of course, was made for more compression. So then I would exponentially increase my size to be able to fit. And yet we could reorient, the actual way that we're making fabric. And then, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like we're overcompensating with the size just to be able to fit into like the restrictive seams. Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting thought. I would love to hear what your experience has been though because you're kind of like our grandmother in this area. You've been doing this for a minute. And you've been working with families. You've had this recognition for lots of years of
in your own experience.
Yeah, in your own experience. It's like, what does it look like for a mother? We'll just say mothers. For a mother to have a body that is dynamic, is able to hold, is energetically a place where a baby would want to plug into. What does that look like?
I don't know if it's really a particular look or not. My whole like part of my design is embodiment.
Yep.
So it's like what I'm actually looking at is not what that looks like.
Not a visual.
Right. It's not a visual. It's an energetic. It's like, oh, okay, this person is at home in their body. They're comfortable in their body. They can breathe without effort. no accessory muscle use. You can actually tell that the breath is orienting. It's like beginning in the pelvic floor and coming up, initiating there. There's this, but there's also a shape without effort. So it's an effortless shape, right? Whereas what you guys were referring to earlier is it's an efforted shape, right? So this, for like from the 1950s, this very, yeah. And so it gives me pause to think, oh, okay, well, what would that look like in a relaxed state? Like what becomes of that when the eyes are not on it? That's the thing. It's like, well, what is it like at rest? So I think I tend to look at women more from the embodiment standpoint, like how are they at home in their skin, right? I know for my experience growing up with the clothing industry was terrible. I mean, because the women in my family were on the curvy side. So there was no narrowness, and it was always about, I was always shopping like multiple sizes from what all of my other friends wore. And then also all the women in our family were very well endowed. So, I woke up at age 11 and was a C cup.
Me too.
And then I was like, holy cow, and then the attention that goes with that,
Yeah, totally.
right? And then you get into, we called it junior high.
You morph your body.
Absolutely. You
prevent.
change your presentation to reduce
Attention.
the attention. It's just, it goes together. And then this was back in the, late 70s and 80s, mostly in the 70s. I was in the formative years, was, the minimizer bra,
Oh yeah.
underwire, minimizer, thick straps. I mean, you were literally like in this,
Corseting.
corset. And it was awful. I mean, the joke about, you couldn't wait to get home to take off your bra. I mean, those were the days where that kind of came from, right?
Wow.
That's when you really couldn't wait.
Yes, you were really going to wait, and that was like the whole edge of that era right there. And it also affected every other choice you made in fashion. Like, for example, if you had a formal to go to and you wanted to go buy it was what was the Benet gown? It was at Mike or Mark, the ones. Do you remember those? There was a big company and they had, they did all of the like formal gowns and pageant gowns and all of that. Anyway, you guys might not remember that company.
I remember the name of it, but I can picture.
Yeah, but like all of those gowns were made for, thin women that had no breasts. And, and if you couldn't fit in that, then who were you anyway, right? So you were really defined by your ability to wear what everybody else wore.
Wow.
There was no like freedom there at all.
And then depending on like sports, culture, like I remember I did competitive dancing for a season of my life, and a lot of the women were more, let's say like just more maybe flat chested is maybe what I would call it back then. And when I started developing breasts for the first time, I remember tripling like bras to try to flatten things out to then try to stay in rapport with my dancing company.
Wow.
I had an experience with like basketball and team sports where I would double the bra because I needed more support.
That's another thing too.
There wasn't an offering.
If you were athletically inclined or you were active in any way and you were a double D, because I was, then oh my gosh, they didn't have that. They didn't have like
the options weren't as endless. It was like a little bit more searching. If you were gonna get something like that, that would be kind of in rapport with maybe your collective group. It was searching or had it handmade.
That's so interesting. I always remember, even in track, everybody wore double bras, double sports bras. Yeah. Where you could not breathe. You literally could not breathe.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
Wow.
2006?
Back in the day.
With a Nike swoosh.
Yes, exactly. Two of them.
Highlighter.
Back in the day. Yeah. And it's the whole thing, with that too, when you go into breastfeeding, like my first child was born in 93 and I breastfed all of my children. Clothes created for breastfeeding? No, not a thing. And then also, when you're that size, you don't wear shirts that button because if you're one size here and you're another size here, that didn't fit, right? So that was a whole thing, you know. And then when it came to like choosing clothes that you could actually feed a child, like breastfeed a child in, that was like not even a thing back then.
Yeah, it's interesting too to think about even now, obviously clothes are way more expressive and like we have more options available potentially. The internet is helping make things available. But even it's interesting to know like who creates a brand, because say for instance, there's one brand of dresses that I love, but none of them are breastfeeding friendly. So like the moment I was wearing them all through pregnancy, you know, I'm maidenhood. I'm like, this is so flowing, beautiful and perfect. And then I got to postpartum and I was like, no, I can't get in. Like I would have to pull my whole dress
everything.
up, put it over my shoulder,
Totally.
and like, no way.
I can remember like before the baptism of my first child, he needed to eat. And so I had to go into like the women's parlor and basically undress from the top down to feed him and then get back dressed and go, you know, baptize him. That's how it was.
Well, and it's even hard to believe because this is so different here where we live. But back when I lived in a certain location on the mainland and I was breastfeeding a child for the first time, to be in rapport with that town, you don't breastfeed in public. And if you do, you're covered and you're hunched. And so breastfeeding position, if you are around anybody, is this. And naturally, of course, this is now going to be your normal breastfeeding position. So I think it's so interesting to even look at belief systems, shame, hiding, covering, and then how much you are kind of concaving in a way.
The number one thing that postpartum mothers come in and complain about is like tension.
Yeah. All the upper body stuff.
Like, of course.
Wow.
Yeah, like start opening your
And
body
then from
up.
a functional feeding standpoint, you can't, the
can't do
baby
that.
can't get open and back.
They're going to be
Creating
down and
space.
in.
And then that's jaw function there's dysfunction in the jaw because of the posturing, because of the hiding, you know, the caving.
And then you think about, you know, you map out growth trajectory. And you continue this. And
You do that
dysfunction of the
for
jaw.
18 months, and then that child is flexing to feed.
Yep.
And I mean, you can even see these photos on y'all's Midline Revolution Instagram page. You go to their Instagram page, woman is open and her ribs are expanded, baby is expanded, and how you can literally feel the life coming from the mom just from the pictures, and you can see how comfortable and in her body she is.
And in the moment before that photo, the absolute, what's the emotion? There's confusion, terror, fear of us going, it's okay, let your baby's head go back. God, and they're just like, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, you can feel like, I call it like the great grandmother, like protective hold of, don't let your baby's head go back. You'll break their neck. You know,
Totally.
like that
Speaking
old school myth thing.
We still need to do a course on Tutu and Me for Midline Revolution.
Big time.
It comes up every time. Like,
So
I
that
need something to send to my mother.
To send to
or
my
send to
mother.
my aunt, or send to
Yeah,
my
we're gonna
mother-in-law.
do that.
Yeah, we gotta.
But the literal fear, and it's like it's not even, and some of it's not even theirs. It's like this generational. Oh my God, you know, where they're gonna actually let their
can do
baby's
that.
head go back and then up and to feed, and they're just like they almost can't do it.
Yep.
You know, and we're having to like hold them through that to be able to do that, to allow their baby to open. And they were like, okay, take a breath.
Everybody breathe.
Everybody breathe.
Everybody breathe.
It's
Everybody
all good.
breathe.
Everybody
And then
breathe.
we're showing, you know, this is, see your baby's breath, see your baby, and we're going,
Open
everything's
up
good.
their hips.
Yeah.
Hold your hand right there at their
It's-
perineum. Let them breathe. Feel the breath. Look at their belly. Look at their neck. Look at the.
Some of the
Chest.
most profound rewiring moments I've ever seen have
it's
been
just that.
those moments just before the photo.
Wow, I believe it.
It's almost like terrifying for them.
I believe it.
Then you talk about inversion. Don't even go there.
Yeah,
Whoop.
I was gonna say inversion would be like
That's on day 5.
heresy. So let's talk about in the context of breastfeeding. We talked about pregnancy, this biological universal like algorithm in a way of how the body opens. Something that comes up in our spaces a lot is DR, diastasis. How would you say it the actual proper way?
Diastasis recti.
Recti?
Yeah.
This being so prevalent in today's age. Is it necessary? Is it normal? What is this? How do you heal it? You know, and I think just one of the most simple and profound frameworks is something you were talking about the other day, and you were talking about the other day is, okay, if maybe you guys can say it.
Well, like I think the framework that I map onto the DR principle is, so we have a framework here, and we have a framework. We know that the core, the pelvic floor, and the diaphragm, they all go together, right? They're one unit.
With the horizontal diaphragms.
The horizontal diaphragms. And if I have tucked pelvis and collapsed ribs and a diaphragm that's stuck or in position downwards, and then I have a human inside of me growing, and the belly is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then my hips aren't untucking, my ribs aren't expanding, where does all of the force of the growth happen? It's within this midline where the abdomen muscles split. There's a design for that. There's a neurologic design for the splitting of the muscles for pregnancy. So it's a beautiful design. And it could withstand a lot of force, clearly. But how can it withstand this much force in a really nice integrated, embodied way is when the hips open and when the ribs get wide. That's the design of the female body, is to transform into with length and through pregnancy. And the sewing back together, it happens congruently with the baby's midline function coming online as they get from their back to their belly, push up, and then they start that cross crawl progression. That's when their diastasis recti, people will call it, in infants too. That's when their spaces in the midline start to sew up, and there's a neurologic component with brain development that comes online with that as well. And so we think it's wrong or we think we're defective, but it's really like, well, there's no, what the heck? There's nowhere else for that baby to grow. There was nowhere else for your organs to be pushed because you have this lockdown and this lockdown.
Yeah, it was congruent when we've chatted about these phrases before, but it was correct for that environment. It was congruent for that environment. And I had this experience with my pregnancy with Koa, in which case I had a classic hypertonic pelvic floor, locked pelvis. My ribs were compressed. The space between my base ribs and my pelvis was short. I did a lot of powerlifting, weightlifting, pelvic tucking patterns, contractual patterns when it came to the way that I weightlifted without so much emphasis on the actual unfurling.
Because I think that the tucking or the bringing in of the abs to the spine, you think that's the only way you can get tone.
Exactly.
But like, God, take a bowspring class or do a one-on-one with Amanda. You're lengthening and toning. You're like, how does this work? But you actually create more tone in the length, which is, there are other movement practices that do that as well.
It challenged all of my college education, all of my training, all of my everything to have a different experience. And yet what I knew is, so I had my pregnancy with Koa that ended up in a C-section, and he kind of like wiggled his way trying to find space in my ribs because the actual space in my hips was at the time just kind of like this. I always tell the classic story that I wore the same shorts and jeans my entire pregnancy up until birth.
So crazy to me.
Indeed.
Can't
So yeah. My ribs were like, get me out of here. They were going this way. So I was like a V
rib flare.
Yes, I had a rib flare.
There was no space up here. There wasn't congruence within that whole thoracic cage in relationship to the stomach and into the pelvis.
Exactly. I had your classic.
So the bra band stayed the same, and then the base flare.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I remember my sister-in-law gave me a hug one time, somewhere around 32 weeks or so, and she was like, "What's happening with your ribs?" And she could feel my base ribs basically just like sticking out. And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, pregnancy." And anyway, so that ended up with a C-section. I did a classic like DR repairing program, in which case it's called like tuck in. There's a phrase for it. It's like tuck and tone, maybe. Basically compress, bring it together, tuck as a means of bringing the musculature back together, as if that is the only way to do it.
Right.
And yet you are changing nothing about what is
relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no relationship. Even if they're presenting it to you like you're connecting everything back together, you're actually just trying to pull this together with keeping the exact same presentation of the ribs, hips, head, even the feet. And so that was something that I noticed is I was pulling everything back together. It was working. And then after my pregnancy with Story, a very similar presentation where there was not a lot of space here. And then I remember the DR that I experienced with her along with the hypertonic pelvic floor. I was like, what am I going to do? Just keep I remember having the feeling of like, do you just keep doing this and then this and then this and then this? It's like whack-a-mole at that point. I remember that being an actual download of there has to be a more sustainable way
to be in the female body.
And so when I started taking classes with Amanda and Michelle, and I realized that there is a way to like zip up in a way. What would you call it? What does Amanda like to call it whenever you create the space between the base ribs and the pelvis?
Well, she talks about the finger pull.
Yes, Chinese finger trap thing.
The finger trap thing.
If you guys can imagine it like
and
that.
You pull, and it's kind of snatches in the middle. It's like a basket kind of snatches.
Yes, you actually make the hourglass figure
with
not
length.
not by compressing,
but width first.
Width, then
so
length.
Ribs wide, then hips wide, then long.
Yes.
Then the head, and so that you won't see that progression anywhere else.
Exactly.
And the thing about it is and this was the most disturbing part for me is when I started Bow, was the way that the bra band changed.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was always the place that I went to get the support, for here, right? And then after, that began to open up and that began to widen and really nothing fit in the bra band anymore. I was like, I don't like this. I'm feeling self-conscious. This is BS. I don't, I had a moment, I was out, I was like, and yet my type is to stay in and see it through and see what's possible and see what's there. And I continued on with it. And then finally, as the hips and the ribs began to find their width, then I was able to go long. Then things began to really change. And then it did not seem so pronounced, right?
The width of the band.
Right. Right. The rib width did not seem so pronounced because now it was in a relationship to everything else.
So you bring in the relationship piece, and then with the diastasis, prevalence today, what a lot of women have had experiences with. I mean, Amanda shared stories about people coming in with like a four
Well,
finger.
we literally had it at one of our brain to frames and the village prenatal, and there was another.
And
place.
there was someone in mentorship with you,
yes,
who had a seven finger DR, and she reduced hers by 4 fingers. And her PT said to stop doing it.
Yep.
Because she didn't think it was good.
Well,
I was like,
It's interesting. The other day when we were chatting about this, earlier on, you were like, okay, so you see, because I see hundreds of pregnant women, and you see a pregnant woman, you see them in postpartum, somebody that has DR. What is the difference between their body and somebody who's been integrated into Bow? Number one, always it's width.
Well, and also somebody like myself who had 8 pregnancies, 5 live births, 7 live, anyway, multiple live births, and never had DR and no Bow at the time, right?
I've never experienced DR as well, but I have integrated Bow.
And at the same time, what I did have was I had width. And I think there's also, maybe you've seen this or not, but a tissue quality. So there's a flexibility there. There's a suppleness there, I think, for people who really don't have or don't express that.
I would say that's the exact same thing with pelvic floor tearing.
Totally.
It's like, can you hold yourself?
Yes.
And
allow.
And there's a suppleness of the tissue.
Yep.
There's a adaptability. There's a bounce back ability. I want to say that in a way that's not like you're going back to the same body, but like a healing quality.
Totally.
That's online.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's why I've heard so many women even say that they, like, there was a moment in their birth that they were like, and I had an experience with that as well. It's like a choice of, I could rush this process and tear.
Yeah.
Or I could soften.
We were right there with you.
Yeah,
ejection
if you're
reflex.
navigating the curves, like,
ejection reflex is real.
Process.
I never pushed with any of my children. And so it was always that discipline of just just allow, just breathe, just allow your body to open, all of that, and resist the urge to just be like, let's just rip this.
Yeah, because when that sensation, I want to say, takes over, it takes over every sense.
Right.
It's like a freight train.
But I really think, though, that the access to the diaphragm and the ribs makes all the difference, because you're able to breathe. You just have to like be willing to allow these two spheres to act independently and yet together.
And
So
this
it's that
is-
relationship again.
This is 101 in our birth. Our birth with Kua was, and you'll see this if you get into navigating the curves. You see the exact video of me on holding onto Sam's shoulders as his head was crowning. I'm moving my literal ribs.
Yep.
all I'm
And
doing-
you're also pushing down
I'm
and
pushing up and I'm creating length, but like, I'm like, why are you moving? You know what I mean? Like conceptually, why is she moving her ribs? That doesn't make sense. And that was an innate piece for hit, because he's doing his spiral in the
He's
pelvis.
doing the spiral.
Yeah, if y'all don't already know, you basically, there's a prompt where you watch Molly's whole birth video, and then we come back and we do it on like we take it segment by segment, and we walk you guys through these processes where you're able to see like literally her unfurling alongside Kua's unfurling. It is so cool to watch.
I don't know if we shared the picture in there, but I was going back through it the other day when we were talking about creating like a new sales page and things for navigating curves. And there's a picture as Sam's texting y'all to come or to bring the
coffee.
energy. Yeah, bring coffee. There's a picture of me standing there, and I'm standing there like this with a hand on my hip. My butt is so tucked and in.
Yep.
I was like, I was
your butt
holding.
puckered.
I was butt puckered.
This was the first thing we noticed in the first hour of your
My body looked so different.
of your labor whenever we got there, is we were like, what's going on? We were
Me
like,
and Corey are like,
yeah,
oh no, you know.
butt tucked, and then whoop,
Yeah.
you calibrated that
Yeah.
piece right up.
And he came in 3 hours.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But it was so we had the eyes to see.
Yeah.
It could, because it's how we were holding our bodies at that point.
Yeah.
And that's what's so cool about the whole village birth experience that we share in that course is, yeah, when you have like when you yourself embody that, and then you attract people who have that same,
Or imprinting the same way.
yeah, you're imprinting the same way. And so we're able to be like, bring prompts back to you, and you're like, oh yeah, my body knows this. Okay, I got it. Yeah. So, so like concluding the DR thing, because we get questions a lot about like, well, do I do bow like alongside like pelvic floor therapy, or that's a question for you to explore with your belief systems.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys talk about this a lot. Like if you need to go run out that program, that pattern, if there's something in you that resonates with a traditional type of therapy or a modality, or maybe you bought a course and you just want to go run out that process, then go do that.
it.
Yeah.
Go do that.
Totally.
That's going to be coming from the inside. What I will say, from my own personal experience, having gone that route and then choosing to have a different experience, my entire musculature and entire presentation has completely transformed from just a practice of bowspring. And so that's been amazing to watch how I'm holding my body now in this pregnancy, and watch what is both physiologic and appropriate for me. And then also, yeah, just to feel my own body holding my own frame well is how I would describe it.
In pregnancy.
In pregnancy.
That's
yes.
amazing. Do you feel like there are remnants of DR, or are there ever periods where that's coming back into your consciousness, or you're having a sense of that?
There
And
was-
if so, what do you like? What's your solution? Or
Not during pregnancy, but before, because it was about 3.5, or I had over 3 years of the time when I gave birth to Story to bringing in another child again. And during that time, I remember, yeah, like I said in the beginning of the process, being like, there must be another way. As I began bowspring, I actually remember a temporary widening of my DR before it started closing up this way.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's normal for people as you're just expanding in general. Can you trust the process? You were able to drop in like, yeah, I've seen that. And also you are coming this way. So getting my base ribs online has been probably like
The biggest thing.
and I'm not unique in that way. That's kind of the biggest thing for a lot of people, is getting the base ribs online and then creating the space with their base ribs and their pelvis to come upwards. And so you're able to create that waist, the actual true physiologic waist.
I think that's where we kind of all were feeling the same way about athletic wear or movement wear and how restrictive it is. And we just couldn't get right. And so we were like, let's do something. Let's create something. Can Hapa help us?
Yeah,
Can Hapa help?
In season 2, we'll be wearing some Hapa label. Really excited about that.
Yeah. And I think you got it. I mean, there were certain necklines and certain lengths and, certain things with, the bottoms. I mean, I've talked about the ones I like and, how that feels. Because it's still some of the same things, when you're, especially in the awakened class, you're on the floor. So you're in all of the different planes of movement and,
a boob fell out.
Equipment failure, and that happens to me. And,
you know what? If you have a child on you at all in bowspring, it's like,
so
you're doing it, and then it's just out.
Right.
They're eating.
Should I tell the seam story?
Oh yeah,
sure. Well, I remember feeling like I had finally landed on an activewear brand that I really aligned with, and I was like going up 2, 3, 4 times my size, and I still was like, all right, this is going to be like I'm gonna pitch to them like, let's do a partnership, and I want to bring this to my community. There's a lot of people that do this thing called bowspring. Anyways, these. I think they were biker shorts. Yeah,
they were.
I had them for like 72 hours, I think, at that point. 48 hours. Whoops. And I looked down after I send the brand an email with my elevator pitch, and my seams are ripping on the sides, even though they don't feel like they need to. And then Molly came through that day with I think I want to expand Hapa with an activewear line, a movement bowspring, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what is meant to be. Totally. And that was my feedback loop that
no, we're not.
It wasn't meant to support it.
And then I find out more about the brand's creator, and of course everything that's there makes complete sense. Maiden hasn't had this experience of this dynamic opening, going through transitions from maidenhood to motherhood and
beyond. Like the uninitiated body.
Yeah, uninitiated body, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's going to work for people.
However, it would have worked for me
with
9 years ago, 8 years ago.
Initiated bodies.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yep. I like the way you say that. Initiated bodies.
Initiated bodies.
Childbirth is the woman's initiation, right? It's the creation initiation is what it is. For those women who have not birthed and will not birth, you're birthed through your creations, and we talk about that too. And yet... a physical initiation changes you physically.
Well, I had this experience after my C-section with Koa, coming back actually into resonance in many ways with my maiden body after the C-section.
Wow.
And then after my birth experience where I met myself and I said, I'm doing this, and had a physiological birth at home, had my VBAC, that was the initiating point to my body completely changing. And I've seen this in the field reflected a lot since then as I've heard women's stories and kind of asked this as prompts in my freely rooted space. And there's it's like a chosen initiation along with it. There's can I do this? Can I initiate myself? And then getting back into rapport with your maiden self will show up in the way that you try to hold your body as well. Mm-hmm. So, I liked myself better when I looked like this. Well, I weighed less. I did that. We've all heard the stories in the spaces, and perhaps that could be you in search of your maiden self as well.
Totally. The unhealed maiden coming back around, wanting you to learn these lessons and not wanting to step into,
it's the incomplete cycle from the maiden to mother.
Yep.
She just cycles back into maiden again, and she doesn't actually step into what mother is for her.
Yeah. Bringing in midline revolution. I do see that a lot with, symptoms that come up with the infants in that first year of life, when there is an uninitiated mother. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but just someone who hasn't chosen the transformation in the deepest sense of that. And then looking at their child, like we talk about in the mirroring episode, they're absorbing and they're plugging into you, of all of you and every single element of you. And so they're uninitiated too, in a sense, they're like, I don't know where to go because there's nothing strong to put my foundation into, to plug into, to pull from. Like if you're breastfeeding or whatever, that's literally the energetics of what you're child is receiving.
Wow.
The uninitiation. So it's a strong picture for women. Yeah. And going back to what you choose to, how you choose to move your body, going back to who you choose to surround yourself with. We actually have talked about this. We might have talked about it in the mirroring episode, but the idea that when I have been around my family of origin, the way that my body has morphed back, or maybe even like the clothes that I choose to wear when I'm in a place of rapport with that environment and that feeling, that childlike state, that's an interesting thing to consider and to pay attention to.
I shared this, I think I think I shared it in Rooted Families, but I'll share this story here too. There was one year, maybe it was a year ago or 2 years ago, that we went and visited family, and we're around like extended family and, old friends. And I kept wearing, I told you this story. Yeah. I kept wearing like a big oversized shirt, like around my waist, tie. And finally Kyle was like, there ain't no hiding that. What are you doing? Like, why are you trying to hide?
Untuck your hips.
Yeah. Untuck your hips. Quit trying to hide your butt. And cause that was what I was doing. I was like getting into resonance because I was like, is it safe to be myself, be fully open and expanded?
Walk around with an open pelvic floor.
Yes. That takes a lot of capacity and felt safety within yourself. And so I was like, that was a whole initiation process for me to be like, all right, can I literally hold myself here?
My initiation process with that was coming back and breastfeeding and being like really open and dynamic with my breastfeeding, having my baby just fully open, extended, hips back. That's just not seen, right? Especially in like, I would say like maybe the Midwest or like the Bible Belt culture or like whatever those like little micro cultures are where it's so closed and collapsed.
That's my story in only 1993, right? Yeah. Is I was that mom in 1993. And that was just, it's the South. I mean, it's like really freaked out a lot of people. And at the same time, I could care less. I was doing my thing.
Yep.
And
you're doing it well.
I didn't even, they could leave. I was very brazen about it, but not like openly, like, you got something, like, I wasn't going to like take them. Yeah. But it was like, no, I'm not backing down this. I'm feeding my child.
Yeah. Totally.
So.
Well, America has laws that legally protect you to
now they do. And that's recent.
Oh, how recent was it?
It's very recent, like within the last several years. I think the last states, came through.
Dang.
Very, very recent.
I didn't realize how recent it was, but I remember looking it up.
I mean, like, I could have probably been like,
taken off.
Yeah.
Written
in 93.
Written handcuff her.
Yeah.
Get her out of here.
She got a boob hanging out.
For like flashing or something. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But the whole idea, like even with the legal protection there, I think we get to unpack our own stories on our own time about our comfort level with being out of rapport with, who we're around whenever we're visiting, or I mean, you were like not even just visiting, that was just you.
That was me.
You're like, just, I'm me.
It's me.
It's me. What's up?
Yeah. And even today, people have something to say about it. They feel some kind of triggered in some kind of way about it because all of their belief systems and all their stuff comes up, around that.
Yeah. Oh, around the opening and the expansion.
Yeah. And around the feeding, feeding in an open way, it's very primal and it feels very, well, in the words of Weston A. Price, very savage, like, it's not refined. It's not classy. It's not,
hidden.
It's not civilized, all of that stuff. So we get into some of that, where people really they feel some kind of way about it.
Totally.
Which is so interesting because that's some of the feedback that I get actually with people online talking about the way that I handle Kua or hold him or move him. It's like this really primal, what is that? Sister Morningstar does some stuff with babies where she swings
them by the feet.
Swings them by the feet, does some picking up in really interesting,
which is so primal. Yeah. So primal and intuitive.
I do that. I'm like swinging him I'm like throwing him on the bed, doing it,
Yep.
And the play is different. And just the permission field that allows, I think, is really powerful. And it also requires you as a mother to have and hold that same openness. And I think that's something we have to keep coming back to is the mirroring element. Can you hold it? Can you go first, which we're going to talk about in the next episode? Can you have that initiation process and bring safety into your body around it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I know you guys too, but I've, especially because I have a wider reference point for it, have observed just the changes in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
Very, very much so. I would say for sure in the last 10 years, you know, definitely 8, I would say definitely 10 years. There's this kind of, it's like opening up a little bit, right? Because even before that, things were still very tailored. And even when you, because I used to buy a lot of like, you know, like couture, kind of like very expensive clothes. They're all very tailored and very fit, right? Like there's something that you would have altered before you took it home. And I think a lot of that's changing now. And I don't know if that's because of the fast fashion industry where they're trying to fit a lot of different sizes and minimize costs and, you know, do things like that. But there's definitely been a shift in that, like in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. And then also the idea that almost every single trend recycles.
Of course.
Comes back around. And
Oh my God. Every time like low rise bell bottoms come back, I'm like, oh God, you know, do we have to do this one again? You know, please, you know.
Well, that's interesting to think about too, with the consideration that things cycle around. What are you creating for your legacy, your family that is sustaining down? It's what is the sustainable, energetic imprint that you want for yourself, for your children, for your daughters, for the kind of women that your sons are attracted to, magnetized by. And yeah, if you are like, hey, where do I begin? I know we talked about in the bowspring episode, Amanda's classes are a great place to start as far as bow. You guys have anything to add to that?
Amanda's classes. And then if you're pregnant and wanting to implement some of this, navigating the curves is a great landing place. And then you guys do bow flows, and I've done the bow flows in rooted families many times in rooted families. And then, yeah, what else do we have going on? Midline Revolution will have some dynamic pieces involved with the mother and in the mother line.
Coming up in 2025.
Coming up in 2025.
And then hop labels in the birth canal right now.
In the birth canal.
Which is kind of perfect timing if you guys are in the beginning of your process, because you don't necessarily need to go flip out all your clothes right away. Like I said, it was a year-long process for me to very slowly shift my wardrobe. So yeah, by the time that Hoppa is out, like boom, it's there.
Yeah. You guys have been doing bowspring for a few months, and then it'll be perfect.
Yeah,
exactly.
I love it.
All right.
Great talk.
Yeah.
We will see you guys in the final episode of season 1 next week. So tune in then.